Okay, welcome to this seventh session of Everything You Need to Know About the Ego. And to kick things off, I'm going to share a slide here that has the title of tonight's session. Session 7 is Soulutions for Egotism, Ego Health and Hygiene, Ego Illumination versus Strange Fires. Yes, we spent a couple of sessions looking at ego functions and ego diseases. Now we're looking at solutions for egotism. And you'll see shortly why I have changed the word solutions into solutions. I've got lots of notes. I've been accumulating so much information, researching into this field, understanding the ego, looking at the different perspectives as we did, the Freudian, the Jungian, Osho, Steiner, that I've made the radical decision, because I can't go through all these notes tonight. I'm going to turn my notes into a book. Yes, I'm going to take them. I'm going to turn into a book, so then people who want to go deeper into this and see more of the research that I've done can get the book. And
do you have a name for the book?
Everything you know about the ego, including everything the ego thinks it knows about itself. All right.
Is that part of the title? That's the subtitle.
Yeah, it's the subtitle. So to start off tonight, because what I have actually with all my notes, I've condensed it down to the 10 top solutions for egotism, the 10 top. So we're going to work through the 10 top. And just to go back to the perspective, the modern Western spiritual perspective as held by Rudolf Steiner, which of course I was surprised when I asked ChatGPT what Rudolf Steiner thought about the ego, came up with actually fairly well articulated and concise answer, which I'm going to repeat now. Rudolf Steiner had a profound understanding of the ego, or I, and saw it as a central component of human spiritual development. The ego is the part of the human being that is truly individualized and self-aware. Steiner viewed the development of the ego as a progressive journey and believed that humans are evolving toward higher levels of self-awareness and spiritual insight, and that the ego plays a crucial role in this process. The ultimate goal of spiritual evolution is for the ego to fully transform and refine the lower aspects into a harmonized, spiritualized form. The ego's role is both a gift and a responsibility. It's the source of individuality and freedom, yet also of selfish desires and isolation. Steiner saw the spiritual journey as one in which the ego learns to transcend lower impulses, integrate into the greater spiritual whole, and ultimately become a vessel for universal love and freedom. Steiner believed that the ego has this potential to develop beyond ordinary self-awareness. By engaging in spiritual practices, meditation, and self-discipline, an individual can cultivate higher capacities for consciousness. So, just setting the cornerstone that we're working from here, that the ego is actually something positive, that it's central to our nature, to the self, to the I, awareness. And, it can be problematic. It can, as we talked about it one night, it can be the cause of problems on Earth. But conversely, it can also be the source of solutions, or solutions, as we're calling it. And so we're trying to get away from this villainized idea of the ego. And in this first of the 10 solutions, we're really looking at what he had to say with regards to cultivating higher capacities for consciousness. So that's solution number one, is to cultivate higher capacities for consciousness which Steiner often referred to as organs of soul and spirit, not physical organs, but organs of the soul and spirit that are in our higher members, our soul body or our astral body, and our spiritual nature, which includes the cultivation of things like the chakra system, and the structuring of our subtle bodies, which in the Eastern tradition are known as koshas. And within these capacities, Steiner saw the importance of thinking. And we looked at one of the books that he wrote, The Redemption of Thinking, and how thinking is something, sure. Thinking, is also tends to be villainized, especially from the Eastern spiritual perspective. People like Osho and whatnot, it's like thinking's no good, just makes you tense. Get rid of the thinking, get out of your mind. And so, they propose a different kind of spiritual path that kind of circumvents thinking. But Rudolf Steiner, in his book, The Philosophy of Spiritual Activity, looks at thinking as a spiritual activity for the modern human being. That we need to spiritualize our thinking, though. I agree that the discursive mind that we get stuck in can be like a prison, right? We just get caught in the spin cycle of the washing machine, just going round and round and round with the discursive mind.
You don't come out clean.
And you don't come out clean. Yeah, it's just like an endless spin cycle. So that's no fun, especially when you meditate. People tend to just sort of go up to the first chakra above the head and start spinning. I call that the washing machine chakra, where you just spin with your thoughts. And this is why the cultivation and understanding of the chakra system is important, to go beyond the confines of the discursive mind, because the discursive mind can be like a prison. But the good news is that the lock and handle to the prison is on the inside of the door. So we have the power to release ourselves from the prison of the discursive mind. And when we do that, then we can really go beyond, we can find ourselves connecting to something greater and get out of one of the diseases of the ego, is the lost soul syndrome. A lot of people are really just wandering around, kind of lost, not knowing what to do, who they are, and have no purpose or meaning on life. So it doesn't have to be that way. And so really the ultimate solution is cosmic GPS, connecting to cosmic GPS, which is the name of the course we'll be doing. I'll be teaching in the spring. So yeah, a lot of this development of the egoic mind is based on what we were looking at in previous sessions about balancing the left and right ways of thinking, left and right brain, and the one being more shamanistic, the right, and the left being more the scientific, and how out of these two can emerge a hybridized, or what I call the newly emerging hybridized human mind. Come up with an acronym, NEAM, the NEAM, newly emerging hybridized human mind, that makes the best of the shamanistic and scientific. The shamanistic has more of that capacity to imagine and dream and expand, and scientific has more of this skeptical, doubting, kind of more contracted. And when the two are brought together, we can find this newly hybridized. And I want to mention also that when we talk about the shamanistic mind, I really like to use neo-shamanistic, because we can't go back. We can't go back to the way the ancestors thought. They had a different mind. Things have evolved. We're talking about a picture of spiritual evolution and the evolution of consciousness and we can't go back to the state of consciousness that the ancestors had. So we're really talking about a neo or new shamanistic capacity coming on board, and how exciting that is. And we'll get into that with the bonus class next week, the 8th class, which is called Ego Death, Psychoactive Substances, Neo-Shamanism, and the Christ Archetype. There is a mouthful, and there's a lot to put into one night. But I'm really excited about it because it's going to be, I feel, and I need to do this additional class because we've built a cake, we've built these different tiers, and now this bonus class will be like the icing on the cake with a cherry on top. So that is really solution number one for egotism, is this cultivation of higher capacities that allow us to see. And Steiner actually used the words imagination with a capital I, inspiration with a capital I, and intuition with a capital I as pointing to these higher capacities. Another way of seeing imagination, inspiration, intuition could be, spiritual seeing, spiritual hearing, and spiritual knowing. Imagination, inspiration, and intuition as spiritual seeing, spiritual hearing, spiritual knowing, also sometimes referred to as clairvoyance, clairaudience, and clairsentience. These are pointing to these higher capacities we have yet to fully evolve into. But how exciting that is, because it is part of our destination and destiny. And I'll be talking a bit more about that next week too, that humans have a destination, that is a place to arrive at, and a destiny, which means something that is predestined, predetermined. So how exciting. Science doesn't know about this. Science cannot know really so much of what is in the future evolution of humans. But there is ways to know what is our destination and destiny. And it includes the evolution of higher capacities. So next is the maturation of the ego. Solution number 2, the maturation of the ego. And people don't really talk much about maturation. It's not a popular thing. Like, how are you maturing? It's like, no, I'm forever young, forever 21. Like, I don't want to grow up. I just want to be, a rock guitarist all my life, or a rock drummer, right? That's the way we live, right? Living like teenagers. But, there is a journey, and I like to pull out this chart from time to time. This is called a biography chart, again, based on the work of Rudolf Steiner, that looks at the life journey and its phases. Just like a plant has phases of maturation, from the root phase, and then the stalk, leaf, calyx, bloom, seed, and so forth. So does the human. And it looks like a physical maturation. It looks like physical development. You're a baby, then you're middle age, and then you're old, and then you die. But no. That's just looking at half of it. That's really just looking at it. People call it an illusion. It's not really an illusion. I mean, this physical reality is not an illusion at all. I hate to hear people say that, because subjectively, it's a true experience, and we need to honor our subjective experiences. It's very important for our evolution. But to think it's just a physical journey is misleading, because we come into a physical body so that the ego can have a journey. It's really about the ego's maturation within the physical maturation that takes place. And so you can see, there's something of a descent down into matter, deep into the, from the time you're born, you kind of float and you come in, growing down into the world helps us to grow up. And we experience more of that growing up later in life, where we grow up into more and more connection to the spiritual world from whence we came. So this descent and ascent really reminds me of
Okay.
this classic book. Yeah, you can look at it later, actually. I just want to keep going here. This classic book by Joseph Campbell, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, where he talks about the hero's journey and how this journey of maturation, this journey of the ego, really is like the hero's journey, where there are phases, there are stages. There, depending on how you cut the pie, there's 7 stages to the hero's journey, or there's 12 stages. This is an amazing book. As a matter of fact, I just want to read one of the reviewer's comments on the back, where he says, in the long run, the most influential book of the 20th century may turn out to be Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces. One of the most influential books of the 20th century. Very important to understand this journey of the human through trials and tribulations, which is a descent. The hero, part of the trajectory is a descent down into something, into the abyss, to face the monster, the dragon, say George and the dragon, that he has to have, his skills and his tools. And then when he successfully faces whatever he has to face in his trials, then afterwards he emerges, he ascends into an apotheosis, which is a realization of a higher nature, or of a divine nature that he has brought down into himself. So this maturation is really important. And just also to mention another important book by Robert Bly. He also wrote the book Iron John, book about men, which was very helpful in the men's movement back in the 90s when he wrote the book. His second book was The Sibling Society, where he's really reflecting on how, the world, society, people are just immature. They're just like a bunch of arguing siblings and not maturing. Just like egocentric, entitled siblings, just, banging egos. So the importance of maturation of our capacities for higher consciousness, which is one of the responsibilities of the ego. The third solution for egotism is attending to the environment of the ego. Because the ego is like this kernel or seed at the center of our spiritual essence, the I, the self. And without a proper environment, it's not going to grow. I was going to have a seed here. I was going to have a seed here and go, look at the seed. It's a seed. I've had this seed for years. I have some seeds for years. Why is it not growing? Because it hasn't been put into an environment that allows it to grow. And this is where, I get onto this thing when people say, oh, you're perfect. You're perfect the way you are. Everybody's perfect. Osho said that, God doesn't make anything that's not perfect. So you're perfect the way you are. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to achieve anything. You don't have to go anywhere. Just accept that you're perfect. And I'm here to remind you of that. No. Now, obviously, there's parts of us that aren't perfect, but a seed, in a way, is perfect because it's complete. It has all that it's going to be, but it needs an environment so that it goes from that state to a mature state. It matures and blooms and fulfills its destination and destiny. And so with the environment, I'm going to share another screen here. Ego, see, is at the center. It's the center of the center of the center, with this capacity as a seed to grow. And it's nested within these other bodies or koshas. We've got the spiritual self, our spiritual essence. And then we have the astral body, also referred to as the soul or the personality.
Those the koshas?
Yes. And then the etheric body or the life force. And then the physical body, are nested like one of those Russian dolls with the ego at the very center. So it has to be in a healthy environment. And here we are looking at the environment of the ego, again at the center. And it is the impulse, what really Steiner refers to as the evolutionary impulse at the center for spiritual growth. But I'm going to throw you a curveball because we've been talking about diseases of the ego. The ego doesn't actually get a disease. Turkey. The ego cannot be diseased. It's really the environment that it's in that can get diseased, particularly this area here of the soul or the astral body, or what's known in Eastern teachings as kama manas, the desire mind. When the mind that holds the ego center becomes diseased or out of balance, then that blocks, prevents, that becomes problems for the ego's maturation. So this middle realm here is really the area that gets diseased. And you see that in people's personalities. It's out of balance, they're bipolar, they're schizophrenic, they're suffering from depression. This is the trouble. This is the trouble area, is this area that's between the inner and the outer. And of course, in the outer environment is also as important as the environment of your mind. The outer environment can influence the environment of your mind. You can have, good influences, these happy faces, and then there's bad actors around you that can put thought viruses in. They can pull you out of your center, all the things we've been talking about. With their disease state, induces something of a disease state within the environment of your mind, which affects the development of the ego. Just going to go back to this slide for a moment to point to all these things here in red are really the troubled area. It's not the ego, self, I, spirit, or in the Egyptian terminology, the ku, the spirit, or the Eastern idea of the Atman or true self. That doesn't get diseased. It just gets prevented from its growth. It's dealing with the manas mind or the astral body, the soul, or the ba, where the problems are. So just wanted to be clear on that, give you a little bit of a curve that the ego doesn't become diseased. It's the environment that is growing in that becomes diseased. Yeah, the areas of issues, not the ego. We'll come back to this later. Oh, I skipped number 3. Excuse me.
Can you just briefly mention the first two?
First one is the cultivation of higher capacities. Number 2 is maturation, growing up. I skipped to number 4 and talked about the environment in which you grow and mature. Back to number 3 was how you identify. One of the functions of the ego is identification. And part of the ceiling and the ceiling on the ego is so much of our identification is based on earthly things, on physical things. Like, oh, okay, I'm white, I'm male, I'm Scottish ancestry. Oh, people don't like Scottish people. They're, colonialistic and all that. So people aren't going to like me. Race and ethnicity and all these things that are of a physical nature imbalance in our identification. Because are you an earth being or are you a sky being? Are you a cosmic being? And we need more of a balance. And this is what I was trying to emphasize when I was in Egypt and the war broke out, and I was telling everybody, okay, be like a pyramid. Pyramids are pointing up to the cosmos. They're connecting the cosmic consciousness. They're downloading information for the earth. But if you are trapped really in your earthly identification, you've blocked that, and it creates separateness, division of an unhealthy kind, and leads to the problems and wars and so forth. So really, we have a choice. The ego has a choice. How do you identify? Are you really, it's like, oh, so I was born Jewish. That means I have to support Israel. And I'm born Arab, so I have to support Palestinians. No, you have a choice. Maybe you would be the opposite side. Or maybe, when you come back, you're Jewish this life, maybe you're going to be Palestinian in your next life, and vice versa. Like some separation from this earthly identification is really what I see as the only way for the ego to develop more into its cosmic, to mature towards its destiny as a cosmic being. Sure, we have the past that has brought us to a certain point, but then we can transcend and even transform something of the past as a stepping stone into something higher. So this is a choice to be made and something to think about. You have to think about how you identify. And of course, this points again to how thinking is a spiritual activity. When you think about things. Okay, we're on to the fifth solution for egotism. And that is about feeding ourselves versus filling ourselves, right? If we're going to mature and build ourselves, we have to consider, how we feed ourselves, how we feed the manas mind, that environment in which the seed ego is growing. And one of the problems today is overconsumption of information. There's just a tremendous amount of information out there, way more than what our parents had, our grandparents. And what this leads to really is overconsumption and underprocessing, which really leads to a lack of soul hygiene. I call it soul hygiene, where you just have a lot of unintegrated information. And what happens if you have that on a physical level? If you have a lot of undigested food, or you have stuff sitting around that's not being used, it's rotting, it invites maggots, parasites, very unhealthy influences come on the physical level. That's their function. They're just doing their function. But same on the soul level. If we have a lot of undigested, unassimilated, unintegrated information, then it becomes unhealthy, unhygienic, and invites actually the opposite of what our destination and destiny is, which is to grow up and to bloom. We're not being like a plant that is taking from the earth and building itself up. And so, yeah, this is why one of the important things is to take control of your mind, the manas mind and astral forces, and why we've been doing the concentration exercise where you look at an object and you generate thoughts about it. You're really becoming a master of your own mind and capacity to think thoughts rather than just float along. Same with the Ruksha exercise, taking control of your mind at the end of the day and saying, I'm going to review my day in reverse. Exercise that muscle. And so you gain mastery over this in-between space, right? The in-between space between the outer world and your inner environment of the ego. And when you do that, you will avoid the problems of the sixth solution for egotism, which is inflation. And people get inflated from having too much information that's not really being worked through to the point of being truly knowledgeable. We need to make a distinction between knowing lots and being knowledgeable. Many people know lots. I mean, I don't know where these emails come from, but it's like, oh, I get all these emails, interesting facts. Did you know this? Did you know? It's like so much information from astrophysics to, funny things that cats can do. So we know lots, but knowledgeable means that you have a working knowledge. You can actually apply this in some way. You can bring it through the will into application. Mm. And on top of that is wisdom. Beyond having working knowledge, wisdom is to know when to apply knowledge and when not to apply knowledge. When to speak what you know and when to not speak what you know. That's wisdom. And then on top of that, there's genius, which, just as a side note, we all have access to genius. Genius, is from the same root as Genesis or source. We can all connect to source. We can have those moments of genius, those flashes of insight, and you may have some genius activity one day and then the next day be a complete idiot. Genius doesn't mean you're a genius for life. It just means you have a capacity to connect to source and bring down some idea from source. So the problem with inflation, actually, I love this verse from the Bible, from the New Testament, that says, we all have knowledge, however, knowledge puffeth up with pride. And I think this is a systemic condition in our current culture, that everybody's kind of puffed up with so much knowledge that we're a little bit out of alignment. This being puffed up means that, you're inflated, and it's an unhealthy environment for your ego. So your ego is really not able to function fully with its capacities because you're a little bit too much to this inflated side, which, is towards hubris. And hubris, literally the etymology of the word, means excessive. Hubris means excessive pride or excessive inflation and, arrogance. And so I was very delighted when I was reading a magazine a few months ago called Psychology Today. And it introduced me to a new buzzword, IH. IH means intellectual humility. So, wow, somebody's actually named this thing, intellectual humility. And the word humility, by the way, is from the same root as humus, which means the earth, like down low with the earth, to be humble. And so to be humble is to really, be down at that level, to bring ourselves down. And this article in Psychology Today was talking about how, this problem of inflation is so systemic. Here, I'll quote from the article. The willingness to actually listen to others and to display your ignorance in a world full of know-it-alls is a bold move that now has a name, intellectual humility. It's not only a developed skill, but it could just end the culture wars. Yeah, it's talking about how it's a developed skill, that to have soul hygiene, we really have to work at practicing intellectual humility and to not be puffed up. with all that we know or think that we know. Some other points that the article makes is that intellectual arrogance and the certainty trap blocks our path to seeing things clearly and getting along with others. More diverse perspectives we entertain, the smaller our blind spots and the wiser our decision making will generally be. Does a high level of education correlate with intellectual humility? If anything, the reverse may be true. And I just want to hit on that for a moment. Does education necessarily correlate with, being more advanced as an ego being? Not necessarily. It could actually make you behind in your development because it puts you out of alignment with this puffed up inflation where you can't actually take in more. You can't actually see clearly. You are fogged in a way by all that you know. And this it has in a dangerous extreme. And I wanted to just mention this briefly, how, knowing too much can be a problem, but there's also an expression I grew up with: a little bit of knowledge can be a dangerous thing. Where you have a little bit of knowledge and you think you know a lot. And I fell into that trap when I turned 20, and I went through this kind of a psychotic break. And for a while, I thought I was the second coming of Jesus. I thought I was Jesus reincarnated. I was doing too much substance and messing around with magic and things like that. And I fell into this trap. And it was pretty serious. I had to drop out of university and just go back and live in my parents' basement. And it took a few years really to sort myself out because it was taken for a bit of a ride and then had a big collapse. And this is not uncommon. There's all sorts of people across the street from me at the mental health center that have this messianic complex where they think they're here to save the world, and they feel a bit of power, and they think, oh, I must be, Jesus who's come back. That's an extreme where we get really inflated, really get lifted up high. And I learned a lot from it. Like, these things aren't altogether bad. It's been a lifetime to understand, because at that time I actually had a huge awakening. That was part of what made me think I was the second coming. Until somebody told me, oh, well, didn't you know Jesus is not coming back in a physical body the second time? And that kind of burst the bubble. And he said, but there's going to be an antichrist that comes in the body at some point. And then I started to think, oh, maybe I'm the antichrist. And that's when I started to go down. Oh, yeah. I was, age 20 when you're skidding around, and my, just wasn't taking a hold of my central self. So I had a very unhealthy environment in this middle area between the central self and the outer world that brought about an ego death that has been, a process of rebirthing myself. And here I am, gone from being a collapsed human being to someone who's sitting up and talking about this stuff with people, hopefully with some coherence. Yeah, moving along to the seventh solution for egotism is feeling undervalued, not good enough sense of oneself, and how at times we put people up on pedestals as a result. That because we don't feel good, we put other people up above ourselves, and that isn't a healthy environment for the ego as well. And we tend to have this affirmation that I'm not good enough, which ends up being a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you tell yourself that enough, you really can put yourself into a devalued state. Well, the solution is to really value ourselves more. And we're going to get to the solution next week in the class when we start to look more at the destination and the destiny of the human being and identify with that. Number 8 is, are we driven by desire or are we driving desire? this can be really a problem because this whole thing of desire is what's driving evolution. Desire, think of it. Desire is in plants, desire is in animals, desire is in humans. This word desire is interesting because desire from the Greek desideri means of the stars. This desire that is inherent in us is actually a cosmic impulse that's driving all of evolution forward towards its destination and destiny. But because we are free will beings, it's up to us whether the desire drives us or we drive with the desire and harness it to go in whatever direction we choose. Desire can be really looked at in two ways, which I mentioned earlier this evening: sympathies and antipathies. That sympathy is like, oh, I desire this, I like it, I resonate with it, I'm open to it, I'm moving in that direction. And the opposite is, I don't desire it, I have antipathy towards it, I fear it, I'm repulsed by it, I'm moving away from it. And that's basically the way animals govern their lives. They go towards things they desire and they move away from things they don't desire. But that's pretty low level for a human. And the human has the capacity, the human ego has the capacity to choose to transcend its own desire nature, or at least transform its desires and say, I choose to do that. I choose to desire that. I choose to go in that direction. Like right now, I don't choose, but I will now choose to do that because something of a higher moral nature sees a need to be fulfilled. And to be able to see these needs is through this higher capacity of empathy. Empathy is really transcending our sympathies and antipathies. And through empathy, we can see what is more clearly. It's not filtered by our lower desires that are driving the bus. So through empathy, we can see, we can make choices, and then we harness desire by making decisions and choices and say, okay, I'm going to desire to go in this direction, and then the desire will carry us. I get into that in the spiritual boot camp when I teach the 4 Ds of doing something. Instead of desire first, you have decision first, and then desire follows, and then details, and then the delivery of whatever it is you're desiring. 4 Ds. And then number 9, solution for egotism is ego death, which is getting into an even kind of bigger game. But it does really help with the problems of self-absorption. When the ego becomes egocentric and self-absorbed, it's really requiring something of an ego death, which is the same as a seed dying. A seed has to die in order for a plant to begin its journey towards its destination and destiny. So we'll talk about ego death next week in contrast to dissolving the ego. And yeah, it brings us into understanding some of the ancient initiation practices that were practiced to bring about a transformation from a lower state into a higher state, and how we can practice that today with a neo-shamanistic approach for the modern human being. And then lastly, number 10, solution for egotism is to follow the cosmic GPS, the spiritual guidance system will lead us beyond our egocentricity, our self-absorption, our inflation, our sense of being devalued or being driven by desire. All of these things ultimately evaporate when we learn to live a guided existence with the cosmic GPS, which is going to be the focus of the class in the spring. And also mention the focus of the class in the winter is going to be focusing. We'll be focusing on focusing. This is a somatic tool for processing stuff that's in us, in our bodies, in our koshas, in our mind. So taking these things, instead of it just sitting there rotting, festering, how to digest it, assimilate it, eliminate certain things, and integrate it. So we build ourselves as a spiritual edifice. Continue with the Rakshal to review your day backwards. And yeah, it was interesting. Daniela was commenting on whether to do the Rakshal at the end of the day or the next morning. Both are valid, but have a different quality. And my response was that when you do it at the end of the day, you pre-digest the events of the day, which you take into the night. And here's a book called The Night, which is a compilation of Steiner quotes that talks about what goes on in the night. That a lot of our spiritual work actually takes place at night, beyond the veil of consciousness. People think that you sleep because the physical body needs rest. That's only half the picture. We sleep because the spirit needs nourishment, which it gets when it's outside of the physical body in the spiritual world. It becomes actually more active than when during the day it's in the body, because spirit is constrained by physical things and the outer environment. So the night is a very important thing to understand and to honor. So doing the Rakshal before you go to sleep, you take things into the night that get further worked on, and then the following day, you can milk through your spiritual work. It can come through dreams, can come through insights, moments of genius, that this work that's done in higher consciousness rolls out into the physical realm and manifests. And we need to be awake and facilitating that as aware ego beings. By the way, there is another book here called Strengthening the Will, which is a compilation of Steiner quotes about the review exercises, about the Rakshal. And we'll continue to do the Rakshal in the winter and spring class and expand on it more, because there's a lot of different edges to it, and it can get really fun when you get your groove on. The self-study contemplation question: where do you feel an awareness and acknowledgement of something higher than yourself? Where do you feel an awareness and acknowledgement of something higher than yourself and higher than others? Do you? Do you acknowledge something higher than your ego? Higher than other people's egos, maybe that you put on pedestals? Do you experience that? And how does that feel in you? How does that sense of awareness of something higher feel in you? And can you cultivate more of that? Can you cultivate more of this humbleness, this lowering down to the humus of the earth, which, in the words of Jesus, he said, if you humble yourself, you'll be exalted. You'll rise up. Your stature will be ennobled if you humble yourself. But if you raise yourself up in pride, you'll actually be knocked down. It's kind of a universal law, which is important to understand and to practice, this ability to lower yourself, be humble to something higher. And that's a tradition, really, of the past. I was going to mention that earlier, how if you look at a lot of the traditions around the world of the past, the humbling traditions, the practice of bowing, which is like a physical lowering of the head, lowering of the heart, lowering of the will to something higher. It might be a person or it might be an icon of some kind, but we see there's many, many traditions that have these gestures to foster humility. So where can you foster more of a sense of humbleness and reverence and veneration? And next week you'll get a chance to share that in a circle where you see that, where you experience that, and where you get more of it in your own personal life as an ego that's trying to grow up, mature into something higher itself.